Before understanding any concept, it is very much necessary to understand the very root of it, the very background of that very topic, or the very history of that very topic. So, in this today's video, we are going to understand the history behind our Indian Constitution, how Indian Constitution has formed, what was Indian Constitution before the independence. So, let's move into the very slide of Indian politics. The British came to India in 1600 as traders in the form of East India Company, which had the exclusive right of trading in India under a charter granted by Queen Elizabeth. So Elizabeth I. So we are very much familiar with the term that is East India Company. In India, a company came with the intention to trade in India. Back then, it wasn't in their mind that once they present their foot in Indian premises, they'll be ruling India for a decade. That was no such concept back in their mind. There was only a sole intention to come to India, that to trade. In 1765, the company, which till now had purely trading functions in the Diwani of Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. It started its career as a territorial power. In 1858, in the wake of the Saffron Mutiny, the British Crown assumed direct responsibility for the governments of India. This rule continued until India was granted independence on 15 August 15, 1947. So basically, this paragraph has talked about how the East India Company came to India when the Elizabeth had granted the permission them that they can go India and do that trading. And later, by doing their trading thing, they realized that India is such a place that they can rule upon. And until we reach our independence era, they were there ruling India. With independence came the need for a constitution. So when we got our independence, so it was very much necessary of that hour to have a constitution of our own. Hence, a Constituent Assembly was formed for its purpose in 1946, and on January 26, 1950, the Constitution came into being. So we got to know that now that we got our independence, we will be needing our very Constitution. But who would be the people who will be drafting the very Constitution? And for that purpose only, we have that Constituent Assembly. However, various features of the Indian Constitution and polity have their roots in the British rule. So, after we got independence, we realized that we need a constitution. We also realized that we need a particular group or a committee to form the Indian Constitution. But we cannot make a constitution all of a sudden. So, that's because we have our roots in the British rule. So, most of the ingredients, more of the essentials, more of the formation we have taken or derived from the British rule only. There were certain events in the British rule that laid down a legal framework for the organization and functioning of government administration in British India. So when British were there, they have certain rules and guidance on what basis a country should be ruled. So those are the ideas that we have incorporated from them, and we, with some modification, added in our very constitution. These events have greatly influenced our constitution and polity. So as I said, they were the kind of inspiration or inspired us to have a certain provisions alike to them. They are explained here in the chronological order under two major headings. That is the company rule, that is the East India Company. Then we have the Crown rule, 1858 to 1947. So this is the era from when they have ruled to what extent. So first we have the company rule. So as I said, a single company came to India with the intention of trading here, but by seeing the premises, by seeing the behavior of Indian people, they started ruling over us. And later, this kind of company has taken over all of our people. That is first act that we have in the year of 1977. It is regulating. This act was of great constitutional importance, as it was the first step taken by the British government to control and regulate the affairs of the East India Company in India. So this point you can write it in a systematic manner. So what it says, company asks permission from Queen Elizabeth to go India and to trade. Permission was granted. They came, they did their trading, and they started ruling over Indian people. But when their powers got to a certain limit, that they tried to abuse it, then the government from British, they had started regulating the company, which was there back then in India itself. It recognized for the first time the political and administrative functions of the company. In order to regulate that particular company, this act has been came into existence so that the company can be stayed in a particular limit so that they cannot abuse their power granted by the queen. It laid the foundation of central administration in India. That's why it has a kind of importance in the history of Indian constitution. Then we have some features of this act. The features of this act were as follows. It designed the governor of Bengal as the governor general of Bengal and created an executive council of 4 members to assist him. So he was given 4 members to give him assistance. The first such governor general was Lord Warren Hastings. So he was the first such governor general. It made the governors of Bombay and Madras presidencies subordinate to the governor general of Bengal, unlike earlier when the 3 presidencies were independent to one another. It provided for the establishment of a Supreme Court at Calcutta, 1744, comprising 1 Chief Justice and 3 other judges. So what happens? The company came, they started ruling. So the act has to made up in order to curtail their certain limits, and they also made a Supreme Court to regulate all kind of happenings done by the very company. It prohibited the servants of the company from engaging in any private trade or accepting presents or bribes from the natives. It strengthened the control of the British government over the company by requiring the Court of Directors, governing body of the company, to report on its revenue, civil, and military affairs in India. So, the very purpose of this act has to check over that particular company who is ruling in India. So, the power has been given to them by the Queen Elizabeth, so the power has been now curtailed to a proper extent. Then we have Amending Act of 1781. In a bid to rectify the defects of the Regulating Act of 1773, the British Parliament passed the Amending Act of 1781, also known as the Act of Settlement. So this is also known as the Act of Settlement. So in this act, there are certain features or certain points which need to be rectified. In order to do that, we have this Amending Act of 1781. So these are the features of that act. It exempted the Governor General and the Council from the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court for the acts done by them in their official capacity. Similarly, it also exempted the servants of the company from their jurisdiction of the Supreme Court for their official actions. So this is basically talking about exclusion of judicial review in that time. Now let's come to the other features. It excluded the revenue matters and the matters rising in the collection of revenue from the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. Same point that now I have mentioned. It provided the Supreme Court was to have jurisdiction over all the inhabitants of Calcutta. It also required the court to administer the personnel of the defendants. For example, Hindus were to be tried according to the Hindu law and Muslims were to be tried according to the Mohammedan law. So it is basically the reason why they had to establish a Supreme Court here, and also it was their idea to have a separate personal laws for Hindus and Muslims. So from where we have derived the idea, and now at present we have different personal laws. It laid down the appeals from the provincial courts could be taken to the Governor General in Council and not to the Supreme Court. So these are the kind of amendment that has been made into that particular act. It empowered the Governor General in Council to frame regulation for the provincial court and council. So there was also address to frame certain kind of regulations. Then next we have Pitts in the Act of 1784. The next important act this is. It has also such features. It distinguishes between the commercial and political functions of the company. So right now the company was doing all the dealings by themselves only. Now what happened after this particular act, their function has been divided into two particular groups, that is commercial and political. It allowed the Court of Directors to manage the commercial affairs but created a new body called Board of Control to manage the political affairs. It established a system of double government. Now their function has been divided and there are two kind of body which ones will be regulating the commercial function, the other will be regulating the political functions. It empowered a board of control to supervise and direct all operations for civil and military government or revenues of the British possessions in India. Now they have that their root is quite strong in India, so there are lots of functions they have to deal with. So in order to make all the kind of things in a systematic way, there are lots of changes has been made, lots of acts has been made. So which by doing which they can regulate the company well. British does the act was significant for two reasons. So this is the reason why the act was important at that time. First, the company's territories in India were for the first time called the British possessions in India. So as I said, the company has started ruling over India. That was the very first positions of British over India. And second, the British government was given the supreme control over company's affairs and its administration in India. Now that the Queen has realized that the company has become more powerful, that's why they have certain limitation over this company. Now the company is ruled by the British Parliament only. Then we have Act of 1786. In 1786, Lord Cornwallis was appointed as the Governor General of Bengal. That is the name you have to remember. He placed two demands to accept that post. He should be given power to override the decision of his council in special cases. He would also be the commander in chief. Accordingly, the Act of 1786 was enacted to make both the provisions. So he came with this particular demand. Other than that, he is denied to be served in that particular post. Then we have Charter Act of 1793. So these are the features. It extended the overriding power given to Lord Cornwallis over his council to all future governors generals and governors of presidencies. It gives the Governor General more powers and control over the governance of the subordinate presidencies of Bombay and Madras. Now they have quite control over our Indian territory, so their function has been got more wider. That's why they need more people, more act to regulate it in a proper manner. Extended the trade monopoly of the company in India for another period of 20 years. It provided that the commander in chief was not to be a member of the Governor General's Council unless he was so appointed. It laid down that the members of the Board of Control and the staff were henceforth to be paid out of the Indian revenues. So it says the revenue that they will be getting from us, from that only they will be paid. So they are kind of ruling us, they are kind of having power over us by looting us. Then we have Charter Act of 1813. It abolished the trade monopoly of the company in India. The Indian trade was thrown open to all the British merchants. So earlier what happened, only a particular company came to India with the permission of the Queen. Later, by seeing their success, various companies started asking permission to come to India in order to trade. However, it continued the monopoly of the company over trading tea and trade with China. It asserted the sovereignty of the British Crown over the company's territories in India. As I said, now that the company becomes very powerful, the British has tightened their grip and now they are ruling over that particular company. It allowed the Christian missionaries to come to India for the purpose of enlightening the people. As by seeing that particular company, various people asked to come to India, so they allowed Christian missionaries to come to India so that they can give assistance to the people who came India to trade. Then we have it provided for the spread of Western education among the inhabitants of the British territories in India. Also at that time, Western education was in demand. It authorized the local governments in India to impose taxes on persons. They could also punish the person for not paying taxes. So these are the kind of rules uh, that was binding over Indian people. Then we have Charter Act of 1833. The act was the final step towards centralization in British India. So this is the last act on this chronological order. So the features were, it made the Governor General of Bengal as the Governor General of India and vested in him all civil and military powers. So the powers has been vested in that particular person only. Thus the act created for the first time Government of India having authority over the entire territorial area possessed by the British in India. So now that the British has, tightened their grip in India. Lord William Bentinck, the first Governor General of India. So they are the kind of important name that you need to remember or note it down. It deprived the Governor of Bombay and Madras of their legislative powers. The Governor General of India was given exclusive legislative powers for the entire British India. So now the concept of legislative power, executive power has came into force. So that they are ruling a particular part of India. The laws made under the previous acts were called as regulation, while laws made under this act were called as acts. So earlier it was kind of a regulation. That means that certain guide and rules. Now the act is called as proper act. It ended the activities of the East India Company, the commercial body, which became a purely administrative body. So what happened here? The company which came for the purpose of trading only, their sole purpose that was trading was got abolished and they was given the proper power of authoritarian body. They are trying to they have become an administrative body that is ruling India. It provided that the company's territories in India were held by it in trust for His Majesty, his heirs, and successors. The Charter Act of 1833 attempted to introduce a system of open competition for selection of civil servants and stated that the Indians should not be debarred from holding any place, office, and employment under the company. However, this provision was negated after opposition from the courts of directors. Now that the British had a proper grip over us, so many people from there was excited to come over India to be a part of that particular body to rule over India, and for that a certain kind of exam has been made for on what basis people will be selected and they'll be a part, they can be the part of that particular body. They also suggested that Indians should also be allowed to enter into the very examination, which was negated after opposition from the court of directors. But the people denied the very fact that no, we are the people who will be ruling over India, so no Indian citizens will be allowed to enter into the particular exam. Then we have Charter Act of 1853. This was the last of the series of Charter Acts passed by the British Parliament between 1793 and 1850. So when we talk about series, so basically we remember Netflix, and the people who don't have Netflix, they remember Telegram. But this is not kind of the series that you'll feel excited about to finish it like by the night only. So this is the kind of series that we need to remember how British came to India. So in order to have a more success in our life, we need to remember this particular series also. So, coming back to this topic, uh, it was a significant constitutional landmark. So, now we'll be understanding or learning about Charter Act of 1853. So, let's understand the features. It separated for the first time the legislative and executive function of the Governor General's Council. So, earlier, all the legislative and executive functions were kind of mixed together. This act have kind of separated them. Legislative function will be treated separately, executive powers will be stated separately. It provided for addition of 6 new members called legislative councillors to the council. So it added 6 new members into that council. In other words, it established a separate Governor General Legislative Council, which came to be known as the Indian Legislative Council, which has another pet name. This legislative wing of the council functioned as a mini parliament, adopting the same procedures as the British Parliament. So they are kind of a mini parliament which will be ruling over the India, and there are members, there are person who will be doing the all necessary functions. Thus, legislation for the first time was treated as a special function of the government requiring special machinery and special process. It introduced an open competition systems of selection and recruitment of civil servants. So that the concept that we have, that is UPSC and PCS, that also came from British idea. They have already, this kind of idea was in their mind, which they have enacted when they were in India. So later we have adopted this kind of ideas and inserted in our very constitution. The Covenant civil service was thus thrown open to the Indians also. Earlier it was rejected, but later it was also open for the Indians that who will be eligible, they can be a part of that particular council. Accordingly, the Macaulay Committee, the Committee on the Indian Civil Service, was appointed in 1854. So these are the important years that you need to remember. It extended the company's rule and allowed it to retain the possession of Indian territories on trust for the British Crown. So the company was still allowed to be there to administer over the Indian citizen. It did not specify any particular period, unlike the previous charters. So there are no particular period mentioned that from when to what extent they'll be ruling or they'll be working there. This was a clear indication that the company's rule could be terminated at any time of the parliament like. So the parliament felt the company has something in them, something which makes them magnificent, something which makes them rule over the India. So we are allowing them to do the kind of administering the Indian, but we are not giving them any kind of particular limit. The moment we feel that they are not eligible for the post, will be terminating their duty in India. So this kind of open thing was happened during that particular charter or act. It introduced for the first time local representation in the Indian Central Legislative Council. So earlier, no Indians were allowed into that particular body. Later, that because the exam was open to all, so Indian people were also allowed to enter into that particular body. Of the 6 new legislative members of the Governor General Council, 4 members were appointed by the local provincial governments of Madras, Bombay, Bengal, and Agra. For this particular area, they have local people. Then we have the crown rule, that is 1858 to 1947. So now the company is ruled by the crown. Government of India Act 1858. The significant act was enacted in the wake of the revolt 1857, also known as the First War of Independence of the Sepoy Mutiny. So there are various names, but they were talking about that particular act only. This act, known as the Act for the Good Government in India, abolished the East India Company and transferred the powers of government, territories, and revenues to the British Crown. So the company that came to India, done all their things and did and that. So the Crown rule came, and they say to this company, now your work is over. So bye bye Tata. We'll be ruling the India now. So your work is over. You can go back to your place. So it has also some features. It provided that India henceforth was to be governed by and in the name of Her Majesty. It changed the designation of the Governor General of India to that of Viceroy of India. He was the direct representative of the British Crown in India. Lord Canning thus became the first Viceroy of India. So now India is properly in position of the British. So they are ruling from that particular area only. It's not the company rule now, it's the crown rule. So they have showed their interest over ruling India. It ended the system of double government by abolishing the board of control and court of directors. So by establishing their position here, they also did some certain changes. It created a new office, Secretary of State for India, vested with complete authority and control over Indian administration. So now they took over complete authority over Indian administration. The Secretary of State was a member of the British cabinet and was responsible ultimately to the British Parliament. It established a 15-member Council of India to assist the Secretary of State for India. The council was an advisory body. The Secretary of State was made the chairman of the council. It considered the Secretary of State in council as a body corporate capable of suing and being sued in India and in England. So these are the kind of changes or features of Government of Indian Act 1858. The Acts of 1858 was, however, largely confined to the improvement of the administrative machinery by which the Indian government was to be supervised and controlled in England. So all this charm was done in order to make their administrative body more proper and to guide and to have their ruling power over India is in more powerful manner. It did not alter in any substantial way that the system of government that prevailed in India. Then we have Indian Council Act of 1861. After the Great Revolt of 1857, the British government felt the necessity of seeking the cooperation of the Indians in the administration of their country. So right now, all the works they are doing by their own. They were like, we don't want any Indians, we will be doing all the works by ourselves, so we don't need you. But after that particular year, they are like, no, if some Indians will be a part of us, then we can govern the India in a more better way. In pursuance of this policy of association, three acts were enacted by the British Parliament. So, with that need, three acts were enacted in year of 61, 1892, and 99. The Indian Council Act of 1861 is an important landmark in the constitutional and political history of India. So, these are particular acts which needs to remember. So they have also certain features. It made a beginning of the representative institution by associating Indians with the lawmaking process. So they started including Indians. It thus provided that the viceroy should nominate some Indians as non-official members of his expanded council. So they have suggested that yes, we can also take Indians for certain actions in our particular body. In 1862, Lord Canning, the then viceroy, nominated three Indians to his legislative council. These are Raja of Banaras, the Maharaja of Patiala, and Sir Dinkan Rao. So earlier we used to have kings, Raja. So there were among all the Indian territory, three people were nominated to be part of the British Council. It initiated the process of decentralization by restoring the legislative powers to the Bombay and Madras presidencies. It does reverse the centralizing tendency that started from the Regulating Act of 1773 and reached its climax under the Charter Act of 1833. This policy of legislative revolution resulted in the grant of almost complete internal autonomy to the provinces in 1937. So, with the enrollment of Indians, certain changes have been made during this particular act. It also provided for the establishment of new legislative council for Bengal, northwestern provinces and Punjab, which were established in 1862, 1886 and 1987 respectively. So now they were regulating it properly by dividing all the provinces separately, by having proper council, by having all kind of important members, important staff, important rules, and so on. It empowered the viceroy to make rules and orders for the more convenient transaction of business in the council. It also gave a recognition to the portfolio system introduced by Lord Canning in 1859. Under this, a member of the Viceroy's Council was made in chains or one of or more departments of the government and was authorized to issue final orders on behalf of the Council on matters of his department. It empowered the Viceroy to issue ordinances, it is rule-making power, without the concurrence of the Legislative Council during an emergency. The life of such an ordinance was 6 months. So it is kind of a mm, point that is relatable to emergency when we have Indian Council Act of 1892. So these are the features. It increased number of additional non-official members in the central and provincial legislative council but maintained the official majority in them. The other points we have, it increased the functions of legislative council and gave them the power of discussing the budget and addressing questions to the executive. Now that their territory has been increasing, they'll be needing a much wider body in order to control it properly. It provided for the nomination of some non-official members of the Central Legislative Council with the Viceroy under recommendation of the Provincial Legislative Council and the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and thereof the Provincial Legislative Council by the governors on the recommendation of district board, municipalities, universities, trade association, zamindars, campus. So they have to look over all kind of thing that was in India, be it a municipality, be it association, be it zamindars. They have to deal with all these kind of people, all this kind of thing. The Act made a limited and indirect provision for the use of election in filling up some of the non-official seats both in the central and provincial legislative council. So the process of election came at that particular time. The word election was, however, not used in the Act, but the Act doesn't explicitly talking about election, but the kind of process was ongoing. The process was described as nomination made on the recommendation of the certain body. So they use nomination instead of election. Then we have Indian Council Act of 1909. The act is also known as Morley Minto Reforms. Lord Morley was the Secretary of State for India and Lord Minto was the then Viceroy India. So in case of the Indian Council Act, if the question comes as write down a note on Morley Minto Reform, so this is basically talking about that same particular act. That's because he was a Secretary of State for India, the act is known by his name. So it has also such features. It considerably increased the size of the legislative council, both central and provincial. So they enlarged the size. The number of members in the central legislative council was raised from 16 to 60. Earlier it was 60. Now it has become 60. The number of members in the provincial legislative council was not uniform. It retained official majority in the central legislative council but allowed the provincial legislative council to have non-official majority. It enlarged the deliberative functions of the legislative council at both the levels. For example, members were allowed to ask supplementary questions, move resolution and on the budget and so on. So now they have a proper parliament, they have proper division, they have proper procedure to be followed by. It provided for the first time for the Association of Indians with the Executive Council in the Viceroy and Governor. Satyendra Prasad Sinha became the first Indian to join the Viceroy's Executive Council. He was appointed as the law member. So he was the first Indian to be appointed as the law member. It introduced a system of communal representation for Muslims by accepting the concept of separate electorate. So till now they were dealing with all Indians as unions, but later after this act they started seeing the Indians by their communalism. But they are seeing the Indians as Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs. So from this period only, communal representation was made upon. Under this, the Muslim members were to be elected only by Muslim voters, so they were kind of separated the people. Thus, the act legalized communalism, and Lord Minto came to be known as the father of communal electorate. So, this is another point you need to remember who is known as the father of communal electorate, that is Lord Minto. It also provided for the separate representation of presidency corporations, chamber of commerce, universities, and zamindar. Then we have Government of India Act of 1909. On August 20, 1977, the British government declared for the first time that its objective was the gradual introduction of responsible government in India. So they showcased their very aim. The Government of India Act 1919 was thus enacted, which came into force in 1921. This act is also known as the Montagu Self-Ruled Reforms, that because he was the Viceroy of India. So now we will be seeing the features of 1999, because when we are preparing a historical background of Indian Constitution, you can write down how is India Company came. Then we have this Crown Rule that you can mention this certain Charter Act. But after doing so, you need to write a kind of brief notes on Government of India Act 1919. So let's have the features. It relaxed the central control over the provinces by demarcating and separating the central and provincial subject. So this is basically pointing towards the kind of list we have. That is union list, central list, and concurrent list. The central and provincial legislative were authorized to make laws on their respective list of subjects. However, the structure of government continued to be centralized and unitary. So this is the very nature of the parliament, or the nature of the very government. It further divided the provincial subjects into two parts, transferred and reserved. The transferred subjects were to be administered by the governor with the aid of minister responsible to the legislative council. The reserved subjects, on the other hand, were to be administered by the governor and his executive council. Without being responsible to the legislative council, this dual scheme of governance was known as diarchy. The term derives from the Greek, that is word diarchy, which means double rule. Robert experiment was largely unsuccessful, so it was latter was not successful, and it was died along with Government of India Act 1990. It introduced for the first time bicameralism and direct elections in the country. Thus, the Indian Legislative Council was replaced by a bicameral legislature consisting of an upper house, Council of State, and a lower house, Legislative Assembly. The majority of members of both the houses were chosen by direct election. So, direct election was introduced at that time. It required that the three of the six members of the Viceroy Executive Council, other than the Commander-in-Chief, were to be Indian. So, they are kind of criteria for the election. It extended the principle of communal representation by providing separate electorates for Sikhs, Indian Christian, Anglo-Indians, and European. That is a kind of division. It granted franchise to a limited number of people on the basis of property tax or education. It created a new office for the High Commissioner for India in London, and transferred to him some of the functions he had to perform by the Secretary of State for India. The functions were transferred to a particular person. It provided for the establishment of a Public Service Commission (PCS). Hence, the Central Public Service Commission was set up in 1926 for recruiting civil servants. So all the idea was there. It separated for the first time provincial budget from the central budget, authorized the provincial legislature to enact their budgets. It provided for the appointment of the Judiciary Commission to inquire into and report on its working in 10 days of its coming into force. Thus, kind of commission we have, this kind of ayog we have, that they provided their reports. Such as kind of system was also back then. Then we have Simon Commission. In November 1927 itself, the British government announced the appointment a seven-member statutory commission under the chairmanship of Sir John Simon to report on the conditions of India under this new constitution. So all this provision has been made, all the people has been selected, but the duty has been given to this particular commission to give report over how the administration is going over India, how the people are working. So you want a proper report, which has been given by this Simon Commission. The commission submitted its report in 1930 and recommended the abolition of diarchy, extension of responsible government in the provinces, establishment of Federation of British India and princely state, continuation of communal electors, and so on. So these are kind of recommendations they have given to the authority. To consider the proposals of the Commission, the British government convened three round-table conferences of the representative of the British government in British India and Indian princely state. So, three round-table meeting was held to discuss regarding the recommendation and what need to be changed. On the basis of these discussions, a white paper on constitutional reform was prepared and submitted for the consideration of the Joint Select Committee of the British Parliament. The recommendation of the committee were incorporated with certain changes in the next Government of India Act of 1935. So 1935 is the revised version of Government of India Act 1999 with certain reforms. What is communal reward? In August 1932, Ramsay MacDonald, the British Prime Minister, announced a scheme of representation of the minorities, which came to be known as the Communal Board. So, this is the very meaning of what Communal Board is. The board not only continued separate electorates for the Muslims, Sikhs, Indian, Christian, Anglo-Indians, and Europeans, but also extended it to the depressed classes, that is, scheduled caste. Gandhiji was distressed over the extension of the principle of communal representation to the depressed classes and undertook fast unto date in Nayadawa jail, Pune, to get the award modified. But Gandhiji was not impressed or happy with this communal award and started his fasting unto his death. At last, there was an agreement between the leaders of the Congress and the depressed class. The agreement, known as Pune Pact, retained the Hindu joint electorate and gave reserved seats to the depressed classes. But with certain modification, the act or the award was enforced. Then we have Government of Indian Act of 1935. The act marks the second milestone towards a completely responsible government in India. So it is known as the second milestone. It was lengthy and detailed document having 321 section and 10 schedules. So this is the lengthiest among all the kind of charters and acts. The features of this following act were as follows. It provided for the establishment of an all India federation consisting of provinces and princely state and units. This act divided the powers between the center and unit in terms of three lists: that is federal list for center with 59 items, provincial list for provision with 54 items, and the concurrent list for board with 36 items. Distributive powers were given to the viceroy. However, the federation never came into being. The princely states did not join in. So, whatever the recommendation given by the Simon Commission, that were modified and added in the Government of India Act 1935. Then you have it abolished hierarchy. So, abolition of the hierarchy was made. Indian provinces introduced provincial autonomy in its place. The provinces were allowed to act autonomous in nature of administration in the defined spheres. Moreover, the act introduced responsible governments in provinces. Just is the governor was required to act with the advice of ministers responsible to the provincial legislature. This came into effect in 1937 and was discontinued in 1939. They provided for the adoption of diarchy at the center, though they suggested that diarchy should be there in the center. Consequently, the federal subjects were divided into reserved subject and transferred subject. Again, subjects were divided into reserved and transferred. However, this provision of the Act did not came into operation at all. So these are all the suggestions. It didn't came in operation at all. Then we have it introduced bicameralism in 6 out of 11 provinces. So bicameralism introduced the legislature of Bengal, Bombay, Madras, Bihar, Assam, and the United Provinces were made bicameral, consisting of a legislative council, upper house, legislative assembly, lower house. However, many restrictions were placed on them. So these are the very same concept that we have till now, Rajya Sabha, Lok Sabha. It was all their idea which we have incorporated in our constitution. The further extended the principle of communal representation by providing separate electorates for depressed class, scheduled caste, women, and labor workers. We have separate provision for all of them in our very constitution. It abolished the Council of India established of the Government of India Act of 1858. The Secretary of State for India was provided with a term of advisor. The extended franchise, about 10% of the total population got the voting rights, so right to vote came into force. It provided for the establishment of a Reserve Bank of India to control the currency and credit of the country. So the idea of having a Reserve Bank of India is also Government of India Act 1995 or 1919. It provided for the establishment of not only a Federal Public Service Commission but also a Provincial Public Service Commission and Joint Public Service Commission for 2 or more provinces. So this is the civil service examination you're talking about. It provided the establishment of federal court which was set up in 1937. Then we have Indian Independence Act of 1947. On February 20, 1947, the British Prime Minister Clement Attlee declared that the British rule in India would end by June 1948, after which the power would be transferred to responsible Indian hands. So during all this period, the Indians were very unsatisfied on how the British were regulating them, how the British were torturing them. So they were already about to get their independence, and that time only the act declared that we will be stopping our ruling and will be end our ruling in India. This announcement was followed by the agitation by the Muslim League demanding partition of the country. Then came the very thing that for the Muslim community they wanted a separate partition. Again on June 3, 1947, the British government made it clear that any constitution framed by the Constitutional Assembly of India formed in 1946 cannot apply to those parts of the country which were unwilling to accept it. On the same day, June 3, 1947, Lord Mountbatten, the Viceroy of India, put forward the partition plan known as the Mountbatten Plan. So it was the very plan on what basis the division has been made. The plan was accepted by the Congress and the Muslim League. Immediate effect was given to the plan by enacting the Indian Independence Act 1947. So it was all settled that okay, we'll be dividing the people based on their very religion. So now these are the features. It ended the British rule in India and declared India as an independent sovereign state from August 15, 1947. So these are the very word that we see in our preamble. It provided for the partition of India and creation of two independent dominions of India and Pakistan with the right to secede from the British Commonwealth. So division has been made. It abolished the office of Viceroy and provided for each dominion a Governor General who was to be appointed by the British King on the advice of the Dominion Cabinet. His Majesty Government of India was to have no responsibility with respect to the government of India or Pakistan. So they have uh, gave up on their powers over India. It empowered the constituent assemblies of the two dominions to frame and adopt any constitution for the respective nations and to repeal any of the British Parliament, including the Independence of Act itself. It empowered the constituent assemblies of both the dominions to legislate for the respective territories till a new constitution were drafted and enforced. No act of the British Parliament passed after August 15 was to extend to either of the new dominion unless it was extended thereto by a law of legislative of the dominion. So this is basically a particular list. They are uh, giving their power to Indians to have their constitution by their own and to regulate their constitution by their own, to regulate their provinces by their own. It empowered their assemblies to vote determine the legislative of the territories. All kind of new constitution were drafted in post. No act of British Parliament passed after it abolished the office of the Secretary of State for India and transferred his function to the Secretary of State for Commonwealth Affairs. It proclaimed the lapse of British paramountcy over the Indian princely state and treaty relation with tribal areas from August 15. So these are they are giving up over our Indian territory. It granted freedom to the Indian princely state either to join the Dominion of India, Dominion of Pakistan, or to remain independent. So the what was option was given that what they wanted to acquire. It provided for the governors of each of the dominion and the provinces by the government of India Act of 1960 till a new constitution was framed. The dominions were, however, authorized to make modification in the act. It deprived the British monarch of his right to veto bills or ask for reservation of certain bills for the approval, but this right was reserved for the Governor General. The Governor General would have full power to assent to any bill in the name of His Majesty. It designated the Governor General of India and the provincial governors as constitutional nominal heads of the state. They were made to act on the advice of respective council of ministers in all matters. It dropped the title of Emperor of India from the royal titles of the King of England. It discontinued the appointment of to civil services and reservation of posts by the Secretary of State for India. The members of the civil service appointed before August 1952 would continue to enjoy all benefits they were entitled to till the time. So the person who were already given their post, they'll be doing or exercising their duties only. At the stroke of midnight of 1415 August 1947, the British rule came to an end. The power was transferred to the new independent dominions of India and Pakistan. Lord Mountbatten became the first Governor General of the new Dominion of India. He served in Jawaharlal Nehru as the first Prime Minister of independent India. So this name you need to remember. The Constituent Assembly of India formed 1946 became the Parliament of the Indian Dominion. So this is how India has formed, how British ruled over us, what are the changes. So that's all for today. In this video, I have tried to cover the historical background of our very Indian Constitution. If you watch this video worth watching, do share and subscribe so that I get motivated to bring such more updates. That's all for today. Thank you for watching the video.